You hear a lot about NORAD because of their Santa tracker. But this is a real defense organization. Brian, what is NORAD?
NORAD is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. So it's a group between the U.S. and Canada, part of the military, and they monitor missiles and other sort of air threats. And they've done it for a really long time.
So why are they tracking Santa?
So story goes that back in 1955, somebody got a hold of the wrong phone number, essentially, and they called up to find out where Santa was or, what was up with Santa, and they ended up calling kind of an unlisted number for NORAD. And so the officer on duty at the time answered the question and said, oh, yep, we'll take care of Santa. And it sort of took off from there.
This is one of those jobs where it's a lot of sitting around waiting for something to happen. I imagine they actually have plenty of time to take phone calls about Santa.
Seems that way, but I think at this point, it's a ton of volunteers and stuff. And I think the amount of traffic calls they get is probably more than they'd want to interrupt their normal duties.
How does NORAD in real life actually track things?
So at this point, when they started out, radar was really their big engine, their big source of getting information was radar. And at this point now, it's radar and satellite and aerial, reconnaissance planes that are just up there listening for radio signals and watching things. So they're kind of fusing a bunch of stuff together now to kind of be aware of missile launches or anything like that.
Yeah, I know they used to be in charge of tracking all the satellites too, but they've turned that off. They've turned that over to another organization.
Yep,
right?
I think U.S. Stratcom is what does it now. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. U.S. Stratcom. Peace is our profession. ... What comes after the dots? So radar. Let's talk about radar for a second. How does it really work?
Usually we're talking about active radar. There's active and there's passive radar. So with active radar, they actually send out a bunch of sort of fast pulses of a radio signal and then measure what comes back. So it's similar to like echolocation from bats, but it's really high frequency radio signals. And so they can do that over a big area and they can see, small changes compared to the background and they can say, okay, this is something new here.
Right. You can time how long it takes to get a reflection, and that's how far away it is. If you hit something that's moving, there's a little bit of Doppler. The frequency will be just a little bit off.
Exactly.
So you can get a lot of info that way. You also mentioned passive radar.
So passive radar, usually you have a few spots that are listening across, a broad spectrum for radio signals. And so if you have a few different spots that are listening and are all really communicating with each other, they can say, hey, I detected a signal at this frequency this far away. And you get three of those points together and they could say, okay, there's an airplane that's here.
Right.
Because we're all hearing.
It's passive because they're not sending anything.
Exactly. They're just listening.
They're using the TV stations and the radio stations that are putting out radio waves anyway and listening for them bouncing off something, right?
Yeah. And so if you get a few of those together, you can know exactly where things are.
Why do Wi-Fi radios on 5 gigahertz, some of the channels are marked as, radar channels?
Yes.
What does that mean to us Wi-Fi users?
So there's a big chunk of channels, especially up in like 5 and 6 gigahertz, that are marked for DFS. And so those channels, you can use them as long as there isn't radar on them. And so the Wi-Fi, for a long time, they were essentially unusable. And then chip makers started to incorporate the technology actually where they could say, hey, I'm going to listen. And if I don't see those chirps, those high frequency pulses on that channel for a while, then we'll start using it. And so they kind of proved that they can operate without interfering with radar because they'll detect. And so those work really well if you know they work. And if
so some airports and things must have it and then you can't use it near there?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So can you run this passive radar stuff in your house?
Yes. So
what kind of equipment do you need?
There have been a lot of advancements in the last 10 years of putting more and more powerful FPGA chips in a spot that you can just run them with your computer. And so
I used to have one of those GNU radio boxes.
Exactly. The USRP. Yep.
USRP, yes. That's what it was.
Yeah, there's a lot of software-defined radios, and even some Wi-Fi cards are flexible enough that you can listen for things there. And so there are a lot of projects for running passive radar with one of these SDR dongles and a Raspberry Pi, for instance. And so you can start mapping the skies above you with passive radar with under $100 worth of stuff. It's pretty neat.
That is cool. So what versions of Wi-Fi know how to scan for radar? Do all Wi-Fi cards do that?
I would think at this point it would be tough to find one that doesn't, because sort of goes back to, when they initially did the 802.11g and really opened up a lot of those bands. So I think it'd be tough to find a card that doesn't support these DFS channels.
So does Wi-Fi 7 work with these channels?
Yeah, Wi-Fi 7 actually added more channels. I think now there's 31 channels up in 5 gigahertz. And it operates, it detects radar and stuff and moves away from those channels if it needs to. So, yeah.
Santa would like you to subscribe for more connectivity knowledge.